The sky above the conquered world burned red, heavy with smoke and flame. Sigma 9, once home to proud resistance fighters, now lay in ruins. The once beautiful cities were now piles of ash, and the streets were silent, littered with the remains of shattered machines and broken dreams. Fires crackled in the distance, their smoke rising into a sky filled with the hulking shapes of Imperial warships. Among the destruction stood a man, tall, quiet, and still, his armor scorched from battle, his eyes hidden behind the black visor of a combat helmet. His name was Commander Jace Thorne, a decorated human soldier who had served the Galactic Empire with brutal efficiency. His reputation as a war leader was known across systems, and his name struck fear in the hearts of rebels. Today, his unit had led the final push into Sigma 9's capital. With flawless precision and overwhelming force, they had wiped out the last of the resistance. The Empire celebrated another victory, and Jace received their highest form of praise, a living prize. From the smoldering remains of the city, she was brought before him. She was tall, graceful, and not of earth. Her skin shimmered like moonlight, a soft silver tone unlike anything human. Her eyes, deep violet, almost glowing, held defiance, not fear. Her wrists were shackled in glowing plasma cuffs, her elegant robes torn from war and capture. The soldiers called her a trophy, a reward, a symbol of victory. She was one of the Zinthari, an ancient warrior race nearly hunted to extinction by the Empire. Jace looked at her in silence. She looked back without blinking. There was no plea in her eyes, only pride and rage. An Imperial overseer stepped forward, his uniform spotless, his voice full of smug satisfaction. "Your reward for securing the sector, Commander Thorne," he said with a mocking grin. "She is yours. Do with her as you wish." The soldiers nearby chuckled darkly, expecting the usual, a broken captive, a loyal servant. But Jace didn't move. He didn't take off his helmet. He didn't speak. His gaze remained locked on hers. She didn't flinch. Somewhere in the distance, a building finally collapsed with a deep groan, sending dust into the scorched air. Around them, the world was falling apart. And between the two, a moment passed, tense, strange, full of quiet meaning. He saw not a gift, not a reward, not an enemy. He saw someone like him, a fighter, a survivor, a soul unbroken. The silence grew heavy. The overseer frowned. Jace finally turned his head slightly, as if looking at something beyond the horizon. Then, without a word, he walked past the woman and toward the waiting shuttle. She remained standing unmoved, but a flicker of confusion touched her expression. The overseer called out after Jace. "Commander, don't you want your prize?" Jace paused. He didn't look back. He said only 6 words before stepping onto the ship. "I don't take people as prizes." The ramp closed behind him. The air was thick with smoke, but the tension was clear. Something was off. Something had changed. No one said a word as the shuttle lifted into the burning sky, and far below, the alien woman slowly lowered her head, not in defeat, but in thought. This human wasn't like the others. She would remember him, and in time, so would the galaxy. The stars outside the ship's window stretched into streaks of light as the shuttle jumped into hyperspace, but inside the quiet cabin, Jace Thorne sat alone, helmet resting beside him, hands clasped tightly. The hum of the engines filled the silence as his thoughts spun. War had made him many things: cold, sharp, effective, but not numb. Not yet. He still remembered faces. He remembered names. He remembered what it felt like to bury friends in alien soil. That alien woman, the one they tried to hand him like a trophy, haunted his thoughts. There was something in her eyes, something raw and familiar. Not fear, not even hatred. It was strength, the kind that doesn't bend even under the boot of an empire. Jace didn't know her name, but he knew what she was. A warrior, like him. And it made him sick to think of her treated as less than a person dragged through the dirt, mocked and handed off like a tool. He had played this game long enough. He had fought their wars, followed their rules. But lately it felt like he was waking up from a long sleep, and the world around him was darker than he remembered. When the shuttle reached orbit around Arcus Prime, the command station of the Imperial fleet, he was met with cold stares and fake smiles. Promotions were being discussed, medals, another commendation, a ceremony. The War Council praised his tactics, his kill count, the speed of his victory. No one mentioned the scorched civilians, the collapsing hospitals, or the silence left behind. That night, as the fleet celebrated another step toward galactic domination, Jace sat alone in his quarters, reviewing files the Empire had tried to bury. Hidden orders, wiped transmissions, intercepted rebel messages. There were patterns, cover-ups, secret purges, silenced voices, whole planets marked for pacification. The Zenthari weren't monsters. They were protectors of their homeworld, now dust. He remembered the woman again, tall, proud, glowing with fury, and something inside him shifted. Across the corridor, a secure containment cell held her. They hadn't yet decided what to do with her. Some called for execution, others wanted her re-educated. But Jace had other plans. He waited until the early hours, when the officers were drunk and the halls quiet. With a stolen key code and a silent step, he entered the holding cell. She sat cross-legged on the floor, arms still cuffed, a faint bruise across her cheek. Her eyes met his, calm but alert. He didn't speak at first, neither did she. Then softly he crouched beside her and placed a thermal blanket around her shoulders. She blinked, confused, but didn't pull away. "I'm getting you out," he whispered. Her gaze narrowed. "Why?" she asked, her voice like smooth stone over fire. "Because you don't belong in a cage," he replied. "No one does. You're one of them." "Not anymore." Silence fell between them again, but it was different this time. Less sharp, more open. He unlocked her cuffs and stood, offering a hand. She stared at it for a long moment, then took it. Alarms hadn't sounded yet. The night was still theirs. Together they slipped through the dark ship, past the cameras he'd looped, past the guards he'd drugged. They reached the hangar in 15 minutes. One Scout-class ship. Small, fast, armed just enough. Perfect for escape. Just before the final hatch opened, she turned to him. "You don't know my name," she said. "Then tell me on the way," he replied, punching the override. And as the engines roared to life and the hangar sirens finally began to wail, the human soldier and the alien warrior disappeared into the stars, not as captor and captive, but as allies. As something dangerous, as a spark that could burn down an empire. The stars stretched wide around the small stolen ship as it slipped through the shadowed edges of Imperial space, dodging patrols and masked by signal scramblers. Inside, silence ruled, but it wasn't empty. It was watchful. Jace sat at the helm, eyes steady on the scanners, while the alien woman sat beside him, now out of her cuffs but still guarded, her back straight and her hands resting on her knees. She had finally told him her name, Saela, last daughter of House Varel, one of the Zenthari's noble warrior families before the Empire turned their world to glass. Her voice when she spoke of it was calm, but Jace could hear the weight in every word. She didn't cry. Zenthari didn't cry. They carried pain like armor. As the hours passed, the silence between them turned into quiet understanding. They shared food, simple ration packs barely warm. They took turns resting, though neither truly slept. Jace learned that Saela had once been a commander herself, not unlike him. She had led soldiers, made hard choices, and lost more than she could count. She didn't trust humans. Not anymore. But she didn't see him as just a human. She saw his choices. He had walked away from the Empire. He had broken her chains. And that, she admitted, meant something. Their destination was a forgotten mining moon at the edge of the Helix Rift, a place no one cared to check. A rebel sympathizer had once operated there, and Jace hoped there might still be a safe house buried in the rock. As they approached, their ship took a sudden hit. An old orbital mine still floating after all these years. Shields flickered, and Sayila was already moving, pulling a plasma torch and sliding under a smoking panel before Jace even left the chair. Together they got the ship stabilized, but it was close. The landing was rough, skidding across the dusty surface before crashing half sideways into a crater wall. They sat there, breathless, surrounded by red dust. Then they laughed, short, surprised, almost disbelieving. Jace looked at her and shook his head. "Next time you fly." Silas smirked, a real one, the first he'd seen from her. "You humans call this flying?" They left the wreck behind and moved through the rocky canyons, careful and quick. Jace had an old code from his past missions, coordinates hidden in his armor's memory core. After 2 hours of hiking, they found it. A sealed bunker, half buried, but still powered. Inside were supplies, medical kits, encrypted comms, and maps of rebel networks long thought dead. Jace activated the main console and began to sort through old messages. One stood out. A distress call marked urgent sent just days ago from a nearby moon called Varos K. Rebel fighters pinned down, needing help. It had never reached anyone. The Empire had jammed the relay. Sayila stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. "You want to help them?" she said, not as a question. Jace didn't answer right away. He stared at the screen, jaw tight. "I can't keep running. Not while this keeps happening." Sayila nodded slowly. "Then we fight." Jace turned to her. "You'd fight beside a human?" She looked him straight in the eye. "I'd fight beside anyone who stands against monsters." That night they prepared. They repaired weapons, mapped the route, recharged the ship's remaining systems. Jace reloaded his rifle. Sayila sharpened a curved blade made of a dark Zenthari alloy. The two of them, warriors from different worlds, stood at the edge of the galaxy, outnumbered and hunted, with nothing left to lose but their fire. Tomorrow they would strike back. Not for medals, not for empires, but for the broken, the forgotten, and the ones who could no longer fight. And somewhere deep in that bunker beneath years of silence and dust, a spark came alive again. The sun of Varos K burned low and red as the small ship broke through the atmosphere, its hull still scarred from the last landing. Inside the cockpit, Jace locked his jaw as he spotted black smoke rising in the distance. That was where the rebels were. That was where people were dying. Sayila stood behind him, one hand gripping the seat for balance, the other holding her curved blade, eyes sharp and focused. They didn't speak. There was no need. The time for planning had passed. Now it was time to move. Jace dropped the ship, low through a canyon, skimming between rock formations to avoid enemy scanners. The rebels were holed up in a burned-out mining facility on a flat plain surrounded by hills. Imperial troops had them boxed in, with gunships circling above and ground troops closing in fast. From the air, it looked like the end of a battle already lost. Jace landed the ship in a dry riverbed behind a ridge, then opened a hidden compartment, beneath the floor. He handed Sayila a pulse grenade launcher and slung his own rifle over his shoulder. Both of them wore scavenged Imperial armor, disguises from fallen enemies, worn like stolen shadows. They moved like ghosts through the dust, slipping into enemy lines from the rear. It didn't take long before they struck, first a patrol tower, then a supply convoy. Jace took the gunners with clean shots while Sayila moved fast and brutal, her blade cutting silently through the dark. Every time one of them fell, she didn't hesitate. She was precise, graceful, deadly. They reached the edge of the rebel line, within the hour. Jace hacked a comm panel and sent a single message on a hidden channel. "Friendly incoming. Stand by." The response was a burst of static, then a desperate voice. "If this is real, we're down to 15 fighters, no air cover, we're dead." Jace keyed back, calm and firm. "Not yet." Then he looked at Sayila, nodded once, and they moved. The attack was sudden and ruthless. Jace set off 3 charges at the far edge of the enemy camp, drawing attention. Sayila dropped into the heart of the chaos, blades flashing under the smoky sky. Jace followed behind, rifle barking, taking down officers and turrets. The Empire hadn't expected an inside attack. They panicked, scattering toward cover, confused by their own armor turned against them. Explosions lit up the field, and the rebels saw their chance. They rose from cover, guns blazing, rallying behind the strange soldier in black and the tall alien warrior fighting like a storm. In 20 minutes, the battlefield had turned. The last gunship tried to flee, but Scylla hurled a plasma charge that locked onto its engine. It spun into the hillside and exploded. Dust and fire rained down. Silence followed, then cheers, then disbelief. The rebels gathered around, staring at Jace and Scylla like ghosts had walked into their war. "Who the hell are you?" one asked. Jace just said, "Someone who got tired of watching the Empire win." They pulled the wounded into the ruins. Scylla helped carry a young rebel whose leg was badly burned. She knelt beside him and whispered words in Xanthari that Jace didn't understand. But the boy stopped crying. That night, the rebels built small fires and shared what little food they had. Jace sat beside a makeshift table, studying stolen maps and planning their next move. Scylla sat nearby, silent but present. For the first time, they weren't running. They were organizing. A spark had turned to flame. A rumor had started to spread. A soldier who turned his back on the Empire. A Xanthari warrior who had risen from chains. Together they had broken a siege that no one thought could be broken. Across the stars, others would hear of it. Hope was moving again, quietly and quickly. The Empire hadn't noticed yet. But they would. The cold air on the moon of Draxon 4 cut like glass as the wind howled over the rocky plains, sweeping past old ruins and deep cracks in the ground where ancient mining machines once roamed. Jace stood at the edge of a ridge, his cloak flapping behind him, eyes fixed on the horizon. Below, Imperial tanks rolled in lines, their engines humming low like predators hunting in silence. Thousands of troops were gathering. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was a war now. The Empire had finally noticed. The victory on Varos K had lit a signal fire, and that fire had reached rebel cells long thought dead. From asteroid colonies and broken spaceports, fighters had begun to arrive. Some brought weapons, some only courage. But they all came because of what Jace and Scylla had done. Because of the story. Jace didn't ask for leadership, but they gave it to him anyway. Scylla stood by his side, not as a trophy or bodyguard, but as a commander, equal and feared. She spoke with quiet strength, always brief, always clear. The rebels listened. They trained. They built defenses, scavenged old tech, repaired pulse cannons from another war, and turned scrap into shields. What began with 15 survivors became a force of hundreds. Jace helped teach them how to fight smart, hit fast, disappear faster. He showed them where the Empire's supply lines were weakest, where to plant charges, how to think like the soldiers they once feared. Scylla taught them how to move in silence, how to watch, how to strike without waste. Together they turned rebels into warriors. But Draxon 4 was different. This time the Empire brought its generals. They sent Titan-class carriers, atmospheric, artillery, and a commander named Vask, known across the galaxy as the Hammer of Order. Vask didn't negotiate. He crushed. And he had orders to make an example. Jace watched the marching lines and whispered to Scylla, "We're outnumbered 10-1. She didn't flinch. "We've been outnumbered since the start." Beneath the surface of Draxon 4, a network of tunnels ran through the rock, old mining shafts and natural caverns. Jace sent his teams down with stealth gear and sabotage packs. While the Empire set up their lines above, the rebels moved below like shadows. Every corridor, every ridge, every fuel tank was marked and wired. They weren't going to face the Empire head-on. They were going to break their back from the inside. That night, as the Empire's floodlights lit up the battlefield, Jace stood on a tall hill and turned on a wideband signal. His face appeared on every enemy comm screen. He said only one sentence, "You call us rebels, but we are the future, and tonight the stars will remember us." Then he shut it off. The enemy laughed at first, but as the ground shook and the first wave of explosions tore through their backlines, the laughter stopped. Fires rose from fuel depots. Ammunition bunkers vanished in light. Craters opened beneath tank columns, swallowing them whole. From every direction, the rebels struck, slipping from smoke and dust, striking fast and vanishing again. Pulse rifles fired in the dark. Fighters leapt from ridges and disappeared into rock. The Empire's formation shattered. Confusion spread. Vask ordered a retreat, but Ciela was already waiting. Her team had taken the command tower. She faced him alone, her blade flashing under the red moon. He called her a slave, a traitor, a pet. She said nothing. Her strike was swift, clean. When she stepped out again, her armor was scorched, and her blade dripped with fire, but her eyes were cold. The battle ended with silence. Hundreds of Imperial bodies lay broken in the dirt. The rebels had lost many, too, but they had won. Truly won. No one could deny it now. The Empire had bled. And from that blood, something new had begun. As the fires died down, Jace walked the field with Ciela beside him. He looked up at the sky, where stars blinked beyond the black. "They'll send more," he said. Ciela nodded. "Then we'll be ready." Around them, rebels stood tall, some wounded, some weeping, but all alive. They had no flag, no anthem, but they had purpose. And they had each other. For the first time in a long time, that was enough. ChatGPT said, "A cold silence hung over the rebel cruiser Hope's Reach as it drifted through the Nabari Vale, a cloud of thick ion storms and shattered moons. Inside, the command deck was dimly lit, running low on power. Sparks hissed from a damaged panel, and the ship groaned like it was tired of running. Jace stood at the center of the room, eyes red from lack of sleep, studying the hollow display of enemy fleet movements. The Empire had sent its answer. Not just ships, but an entire purge fleet. 4 dreadnoughts, over 200 fighters, and a command carrier nearly the size of a small city. They weren't just hunting rebels anymore. They wanted a message, written in blood across the stars. No one defies the Empire and lives. Across the table stood Commander Riven, once an Imperial officer, now their ally. His voice was rough but steady. "They'll hit the Elton Passage in 2 days. If they get through, they'll burn the Resistance worlds. No one's ready for this." Jace said nothing. His hands gripped the edge of the table. Ciela entered, silently, her armor scarred, her hair pulled back, and a deep gash across one cheek. She didn't speak right away, just looked at him with quiet understanding. Then she said, "There is a way to stop them. One chance." She pointed at the Imperial command carrier, Throne of Judgment. It was the nerve center of the fleet. Destroy it and the others would fall into chaos. But to get close enough meant slipping past dozens of patrol ships and through layers of defense grids. It meant sacrifice. Jace looked around the room. Faces stared back, young, worn, frightened. But not one of them stepped back. They didn't have to speak. They had chosen this path long ago. The plan was desperate. Hope's Reach would charge the front, drawing the bulk of the enemy's fire. Meanwhile, a strike team would sneak in aboard a captured Imperial shuttle and plant a reactor overload bomb deep within the Throne of Judgment. The core would melt down. The ship would be ripped apart. Maybe it would take Jace and the team with it, but it would end the fleet. The hours that followed were filled with fast repairs, weapon checks, and whispered goodbyes. Jace walked the halls once more, nodding to those who stood at their posts. He passed a mechanic welding armor plates onto a rebel fighter with bare hands, a medic stitching up a pilot while reading instructions from an old datapad, a child-turned-scout sleeping curled up in a locker. These people weren't soldiers, but they were his people. Before launch, Jace stood at the hangar with Ciela. The shuttle engines roared, ready. She looked at him, her voice soft. "You don't have to do this alone." He smiled faintly. "I was never alone." Then they boarded. The shuttle launched into the chaos of space, slipping behind the Hope's Reach as it began its suicidal charge. Cannons lit up the void, beams of blue and red streaking across the stars. The Empire opened fire, ships exploding on both sides. The Hope's Reach was battered, wounded, but still moving, still buying them time. Through the wreckage and debris, the small shuttle drifted unnoticed. Inside, Jace, Ciela, and 4 others crept through narrow halls of the enemy flagship. Disguised in stolen uniforms, they passed through metal corridors filled with cold, sharp lights and silent guards. They split into teams. Jace and Ciela took the core. Every step deeper into the ship felt like walking through the mouth of a giant beast. When they reached the central reactor, alarms finally blared. The disguise was over. Blasters screamed. Ciela moved like a shadow, slicing through guards. Jace planted the bomb, blood running down his arm from a wound. They had less than 6 minutes to escape, but the exit was sealed. Dozens of troops closed in. Ciela looked at Jace and, without a word, stepped forward, blade raised. She would hold them off. He tried to stop her. She touched his chest gently. "You gave me freedom," she said. "Now I give you time." Then she turned and charged into the enemy ranks like lightning. Jace ran. Behind him, explosions rocked the halls. He reached a maintenance pod, slammed the release, and launched into space. Seconds later, the throne of judgment split apart, behind him in a blinding fireball that turned the sky white. And Ciela was gone. But the fleet had broken, the Empire's purge had failed, and the stars now carried a new story. The pod drifted in the black sea of space, small and silent among the shattered ruins of the once mighty throne of judgment. Inside, Jace barely breathed. His hands were burned, his chest ached, and his mind was a storm of images. Flashes of Ciela's last stand, her voice, her eyes, the way she had touched his chest before turning away forever. The explosion had knocked out his comms, and now the stars around him felt colder than ever. He didn't know if the rebels had survived. He didn't know if the plan had worked. All he knew was that she was gone. For what felt like hours, he floated in silence, watching broken bits of metal pass by, some glowing, some turning to dust. Then, faintly, a light blinked in the corner of the pod. A distress beacon. Someone had picked up his signal. He leaned forward, heart pounding, as a sleek ship dropped out of warp just above him. Its hull bore no imperial marks. Instead, painted across its side were 3 defiant letters: HRX. Hope's reach had survived. The crew pulled him in quickly, cheering, shouting his name. Faces streaked with ash and tears greeted him like a brother returned from war. Riven gripped his arm with silent pride, and the medic rushed in, but Jace brushed them off, standing weakly on trembling legs. "Did it work?" he asked. Riven nodded slowly. "The fleet scattered. They lost command. The purge is over." Relief surged through the room like light. But Jace's face didn't change. He sat down hard, looking through the view window at the stars. "She didn't make it," he said softly. The room fell quiet. No one needed to ask who. Later, when the ship docked with the rebel station on Leora's moon, the people lined up to greet him. Survivors from dozens of worlds, soldiers, engineers, children. They had heard. They had seen the flames in the sky. The story had already spread. The man who turned down power and chose freedom. The alien warrior who stood beside him. The ones who dared to strike at the heart of the Empire. Songs had already begun in the streets. Murals painted in ash and fire showed Jace and Ciela standing back to back, facing down ships 10 times their size. He didn't speak at the ceremony. He stood at the edge, watching as Riven gave a speech to 1,000 rebels now ready to rebuild. He just held a small blade in his hand. Ciela's. He had found it floating in the wreckage, and he swore to carry it with him always. The days that followed were filled with rebuilding. The resistance wasn't just running anymore. They were growing. Free planets lit their signals once more, joining together under one symbol, one forged in fire and sacrifice. And Jace, though he never asked for it, became a legend. Not just for what he had done, but for what he had refused to become. He didn't take command. He didn't sit on a throne or claim any prize. He worked beside everyone else, patching hulls, flying supply runs, training young recruits, but they still whispered stories behind him. Of the man who defied the Empire's gift. of the alien woman who gave her life not for a master, but for a friend. One night, he stood on the cliffs of Leora's moon, watching the stars. A young girl approached, holding a small wooden carving. It was Sayela, holding her blade high. "Did she really fight them all?" the girl asked. Jace knelt, nodding. "She fought for something more, for her own choice, for us all." The girl handed him the carving. "I want to be like her." Jace took the figure gently, smiling through the ache. "Then the stars are safer already." Behind them, the rebel flag fluttered over the new headquarters. A symbol not of power, but of unity. Not of control, but of freedom. And above it, countless lights blinked in the sky. The galaxy was changing, slowly, painfully. But for the first time in a long while, hope was not just a name on a ship. It was real. It was rising. Months passed. The galaxy stirred like a wounded beast, licking its scars, uncertain whether to strike again or stay still. But among the broken stars and burnt worlds, something new was being born. From the ruins of the Empire's grip, free, voices began to rise. Planets once crushed under the heel of cruelty now stood taller, encouraged by the fire that had lit the skies the day the throne of judgment fell. And at the center of it all was the legend of the human soldier, and the alien woman who had stood together not as master and slave but as equals. Brother and sister in war, bound by purpose and sacrifice. Jace found no peace in fame. He avoided councils and meetings, choosing instead to work with his hands. His ship, Drifter's End, became a symbol of quiet strength, flying alone into places no one else dared, bringing aid, bringing word, bringing the truth. In old mining colonies, rebels still whispered his name. On frontier worlds, they raised banners in his image, not because he asked them to, but because they needed a reason to believe. He never spoke of Sayela, unless someone asked. But when he did, his voice always grew still, like the calm before a storm. He would tell them how she could move like fire, fight like thunder, and still pause to touch a flower in silence. How she had once been chained, but never truly broken. How she had chosen her path, knowing it would cost everything. He carried her blade with him always, not as a weapon, but as a promise. One day, as the stars wheeled overhead, an urgent call reached him from a distant outpost near the void expanse. A new force was rising there. Not imperial, not rebel. Something darker. Survivors from old Empire fleets, pirates, warlords, gathering under a single symbol that twisted the Empire's old crest with something new. They were calling themselves the Crownless, and they wanted revenge. Jace didn't hesitate. He sent no message for backup. He fueled his ship and flew alone. The stars blurred past him, and the old fire rose in his chest once more. Not for war, not for blood, but because he knew if he didn't stand, others would fall. When he reached the outpost, it was already burning. Ships circled like vultures, and ground forces moved through the smoke. He landed hard, pulled his jacket tight, and stepped into the fire. He fought with blade and blaster, darting between shadows, taking down soldiers twice his size. But it wasn't just him anymore. Behind him, others had followed. Pilots, mechanics. Even farmers turned warriors. They had heard he was going, and if Jace went, they would too. The battle lasted all night. Buildings fell. The air stank of oil and ozone, but by dawn the enemy was broken. The Crownless had not expected unity. They had expected fear. Instead, they found resolve, carved from grief, tempered by memory. Jace stood among the ashes, eyes locked on the horizon. He knew this wasn't the end. New tyrants would always rise, but so would those who stood against them. As long as even one person remembered what it meant to be free, there would be hope. He turned back to the people gathering behind him, their clothes torn, their faces dirty but their eyes clear, and he raised Sayela's blade high, not as a symbol of war, but of will. The people cheered, not for victory, but for the future. Years later, children would read stories of the man who turned down a throne and chose the stars. They'd read about the alien warrior who once was gifted as a slave but died as a hero. And across the galaxy, From shining capitals to silent moons, people would light candles on the day the throne of judgment fell, not to mourn, but to remember. And high above, in the drifting dark, a single ship would still move between stars, alone, watchful, ready. Because Jace knew freedom was never given, it was protected again and again.